The college fund had $78,000 in it when I checked the balance on my phone that Sunday evening, or at least it was supposed to have $78,000. My hands were trembling as I stared at the banking app, refreshing it once, then twice, then a third time as if the numbers might somehow change back to what they were supposed to be, what they had been just 3 months ago when I had last logged in to make sure everything was in order for Nora's future. $16,000. The screen showed $16,000 where there should have been $78,000, and my stomach dropped through the floor of my parents' dining room as the realization hit me like a physical blow to my chest. $62,000 was missing. $62,000 that my late husband Michael had contributed to before he died. Money he had earned working double shifts at the hospital. Money he had carefully set aside every month since Nora was born because he wanted to make sure his daughter would never have to struggle the way he had struggled to pay for his own education. Money that I had continued adding to after his death, scraping together whatever I could from my salary as a teacher, putting aside extra money from tutoring during summers, all of it meant to honor Michael's memory and give Nora the future he had dreamed for her. I looked up from my phone and across the dinner table at my mother, who had just finished telling Kelly how wonderful it was that they could help with Morgan's college expenses, how family helps family, how grateful we should all be that the money was there when needed. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. She was busy clearing plates from the table, moving with a nervous energy that I had never seen in her before, refusing to look in my direction even though she had to have heard me ask the question that was still hanging in the air between us. Where had the $62,000 come from? The same $62,000 that had apparently vanished from my daughter's college fund. My father sat stoically at the head of the table, his jaw set in that stubborn expression I knew so well from every argument we had ever had, every disagreement where he had decided he was right, and nothing I could say would change his mind. My sister Kelly was looking everywhere, but at me, her face flushed with something that looked like a mixture of embarrassment and defiance, while my niece Morgan continued eating as if nothing unusual was happening at all. Nora sat beside me, her 14-year-old face confused and worried, sensing the tension even if she didn't understand what was causing it. The roast chicken on my plate had gone cold, the vegetables congealing in their butter sauce, and I felt suddenly nauseous as the pieces of this puzzle started falling into place in my mind. My parents had been complaining about their fixed income for years, telling me they couldn't afford to fix the roof, couldn't afford to travel, couldn't afford to help me with Nora's expenses after Michael died because they were on such a tight budget. I had believed them. I had felt guilty asking them for anything, had made sure to bring groceries when I visited, had offered to pay for dinner when we went out because I didn't want to burden them financially. And all along, they had somehow found $62,000 to give to Kelly and Morgan. The question wasn't really where the money had come from anymore. The question was whether I was going to be able to sit at this table and pretend that everything was normal when I already knew the answer, when the evidence was right there in my shaking hands, and the app on my phone that showed my daughter's future had been stolen out from under her. Michael had been dead for 8 years now, killed by a drunk driver on his way home from a night shift when Nora was just 6 years old, and I had spent those 8 years trying to rebuild our lives, trying to be both mother and father to a little girl who couldn't understand why her daddy wasn't coming home anymore. The college fund had been his idea, something he had started before Nora was even born, a savings account that he had turned into a proper trust when she arrived, adding to it religiously every month from his salary as a registered nurse. He had come from a family that couldn't afford to send him to college, had worked his way through nursing school while living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles for every meal, and he had been determined that his daughter would have every opportunity that he had to fight for. After he died, I had made a promise to myself and to his memory that I would protect that fund, that I would make sure Nora could go to whatever college she wanted, that at least this one piece of Michael's dreams for our daughter would survive even if he couldn't be here to see it happen. And now my own parents, the people who were supposed to love and protect their granddaughter, had taken that away. My mother finally spoke from the kitchen, her voice carrying through the doorway with a false brightness that made my skin crawl. She said we should talk about something else, that this wasn't the time or place for these kinds of discussions, that we should just enjoy our family dinner like we always did. But I couldn't enjoy anything, couldn't think about anything except the number 16,000 glowing on my phone screen and the $62,000 that had been siphoned away from my daughter's future. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor, and I heard Nora's sharp intake of breath beside me. My father's eyes finally met mine, and in them I saw something I had never seen before, a cold hardness that made me feel like a stranger in my own childhood home. He asked me where I was going, told me to sit down and finish my dinner, said we could discuss money matters another time like civilized people. But I wasn't feeling particularly civilized at that moment. I was feeling like a mother whose child had been wronged, like a widow whose husband's last gift to his daughter had been stolen, like a daughter who was realizing that the parents she had loved and trusted her entire life were capable of a betrayal she had never imagined possible. The drive home was quiet, painfully quiet, with Nora sitting in the passenger seat staring out the window at the darkened streets, while I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I could feel her eyes on me occasionally, could sense the questions she wanted to ask but was afraid to voice, and I didn't know how to begin explaining what had just happened. How do you tell your 14-year-old daughter that her grandparents stole her college fund? How do you explain that the money her father had saved for her, the money that represented his love and his hopes for her future, had been given away to her cousin without anyone bothering to ask or even tell her? Nora had adored her grandparents growing up, had looked forward to these monthly dinners, had always insisted on sitting next to her grandfather so she could hear his stories about when he was young. She had never experienced the kind of favoritism that was so obvious to everyone else in the family, had never noticed that Morgan got more attention, more praise, more everything while Nora was often treated as an afterthought. She had simply loved them because they were her grandparents, because children love unconditionally until someone gives them a reason not to. And now they had given her the ultimate reason, had shown her exactly what they thought her father's legacy was worth. When we got home, I sat Nora down at our kitchen table and made us both cups of hot chocolate even though it was summer, because that was what my mother had always done when I was upset as a child, and I didn't know what else to do. I told her everything, starting from the beginning, explaining about the college fund and how her father had started it, how I had continued adding to it, how the money was supposed to be there for her future. Then I told her what I had discovered at dinner, about the $62,000 her grandparents had given to Morgan, about the missing money in her account, about what I believed had happened even though I didn't have proof yet. Nora's face went through a transformation as I spoke, the confusion clearing away to be replaced by something that looked like hurt, then anger, then a sadness so profound it broke my heart to witness it. She asked me why they would do something like that, why they would take her father's money and give it to someone else, whether they loved Morgan more than they loved her. I didn't have answers for her. I couldn't explain the unfairness of the world, couldn't make sense of actions that made no sense to me either. All I could do was hold her while she cried. While she mourned not just the loss of her college fund, but the loss of grandparents she had thought loved her unconditionally. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent going through old bank statements and trust documents, I called every lawyer in my area who specialized in trust and estate law until I found one who could see me that afternoon. I brought everything I had, every piece of paper that documented Nora's college fund from its inception to the present day, every statement showing the deposits Michael had made and the deposits I had continued making after his death. I brought the trust documents that my parents had helped me set up when Nora was born, documents that listed my mother as co-trustee, something we had done because Michael wanted to make sure someone could access the funds if something happened to both of us, a decision that now seemed tragically naive. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing, listened to my story without interrupting, her face revealing nothing about what she was thinking. When I finished, she asked to see my phone, and together we logged into the banking app and traced the transactions that showed the money leaving Nora's account in 3 large transfers over a period of 2 months, each one moving first to my mother's personal account, and then, within days, to my sister Kelly's account. Patricia Chen leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers, looking at me over the rims of her reading glasses with an expression I couldn't quite read. She told me this was fraud, plain and simple, a clear violation of my mother's fiduciary duty as co-trustee of the trust. She explained that a trustee has a legal obligation to manage trust assets for the benefit of the beneficiary, in this case Nora, and that transferring money to anyone else without authorization was not just wrong but criminal. She asked me if I was prepared for what would happen next, because pursuing this legally would mean pressing charges against my own mother, would mean my parents might face criminal prosecution, would mean the family drama I had experienced at dinner would seem like nothing compared to what was coming. I thought about Nora crying in her bedroom the night before, about Michael working double shifts for years to save that money, about the way my mother had refused to even look at me when I asked her directly whether she had taken the funds. I told Patricia that I was ready for whatever came next, that I owed it to my daughter and to my husband's memory to fight for what was right. She nodded slowly, as if she had expected this answer, and began outlining our legal options. The civil lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later, a document that spelled out in cold legal terms exactly what my mother had done and demanded repayment of the full amount, plus interest and legal fees. I also filed a police report, providing all the documentation Patricia had helped me gather, the bank records and trust documents and transaction histories that painted an undeniable picture of theft. My parents' response came in the form of angry phone calls and voicemails, messages I listened to once and then saved as evidence, my mother's voice shrill with indignation as she demanded to know how I could do this to them, how I could call the police on my own parents, how I could air our family's dirty laundry in public like this. My father's messages were calmer, but no less angry, his disappointment in me evident in every word, his insistence that they had done nothing wrong, that it was family money and family decisions, and I was being unreasonable and vindictive. I forwarded everything to Patricia, as instructed, and did not respond to a single message. Kelly called me separately, her tone alternating between pleading and accusatory, telling me I was tearing the family apart, that Morgan deserved that money, that Nora would be fine without it because she was smart and would get scholarships anyway. I asked her if she would have accepted that money if she had known where it came from, if she would have taken $62,000 knowing it had been stolen from her niece, and she hesitated for just a moment before saying that the money was a gift from our parents, and it wasn't her place to question their decisions. That moment of hesitation told me everything I needed to know about my sister's moral compass, about where her priorities lay in this situation. She had benefited from the theft of her niece's inheritance, and rather than acknowledge that what had happened was wrong, she was defending it, attacking me for seeking justice, acting as if I was the villain in this story rather than the victim. The next 6 months were a blur of legal proceedings and family conflict, a period of my life that felt like wading through thick mud while being attacked from all sides. My parents hired their own lawyer, a man who tried to argue that as co-trustee, my mother had the authority to make decisions about the trust assets, that the transfers were legitimate exercises of her judgment about what was best for the family. But Patricia Chen was ready for that argument, presenting case after case that established the limits of a trustee's authority, the absolute requirement that trust assets be used only for the benefit of the named beneficiary. She brought in financial experts who testified about the clear paper trail, showing the money moving from Nora's account to my mother's account to Kelly's account, with no documentation or authorization, with no attempt to even pretend that the transfers were for Nora's benefit. The evidence was so overwhelming that my parents' lawyer could barely mount a defense, could only argue that their intentions were good, that they were trying to help Morgan, that they believed Nora would be fine without the money. The day of the judge's ruling, I sat in the courtroom with Nora beside me, my daughter now 15 years old and old enough to understand exactly what was happening and why it mattered. My parents sat across the aisle with Kelly and Morgan, all of them looking like they had expected a different outcome, like they couldn't believe this had actually gone this far. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses that she peered over as she delivered her decision, her voice flat and matter-of-fact as she laid out the facts of the case, and the legal precedents that applied. She found my mother guilty of breach of fiduciary duty and fraud, ordered her to repay the full $62,000 plus interest accrued over the period of the theft, plus all legal fees associated with the case. The total came to just over $71,000, and I watched my father's face go pale as the judge continued, explaining that if the funds were not repaid within 60 days, the court would pursue additional remedies, including liens on property and garnishment of income. My mother started crying, quiet tears that ran down her face as she stared at the judge, as if she couldn't believe this was really happening to her. Kelly put her arm around her, shooting daggers at me across the aisle, while Morgan sat with her head down, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. Nora squeezed my hand under the table, and I looked at my daughter and saw something I hadn't expected. Not vindication or satisfaction, but a quiet sadness, a grief for the family she had lost even as she witnessed justice being served. She had loved her grandparents, had trusted them, had believed they loved her in return, and now she was watching them be held accountable for stealing from her, for treating her father's legacy as something they could give away on a whim. There was no joy in this victory, only the hollow satisfaction of doing what was right. My parents didn't have $71,000, of course. They had given away most of their savings to Kelly and Morgan, and what remained wasn't nearly enough to cover the judgment against them. They had to take out a loan at a high interest rate, had to sell the car my father had loved, had to downsize from the house they had lived in for 30 years to a smaller condo in a less expensive neighborhood. Kelly called me screaming after they moved, telling me I had destroyed their retirement, that they were elderly and deserved to live out their years in comfort and security, that I was heartless and cruel for taking everything from them over money. I asked her if she had offered to give back the $62,000 to help pay the judgment, and the silence on the other end of the line told me she had not. Kelly had her money, Morgan had her college fund, and my parents were left with the consequences of their actions, while my sister refused to accept any responsibility for her role in what had happened. The money was returned to Nora's account. Every penny of it, deposited by the court once my parents had scraped together enough to satisfy the judgment. I immediately removed my mother as co-trustee, restructured the trust, so that only I had access, added provisions that required my express written consent for any withdrawals or transfers. Patricia Chen helped me set up additional safeguards, ensuring that nothing like this could ever happen again, that Nora's future would be protected from anyone who might try to take advantage of her. And then I began the process of rebuilding my daughter's trust in the world, helping her understand that while family could betray you, while people you loved could hurt you in ways you never expected, there were still people worth trusting, still relationships worth fighting for, still a future worth planning even after your past had been torn apart. The months that followed were quiet ones, a period of healing and readjustment as Nora and I found our new normal without the monthly dinners at my parents' house, without the family gatherings that had once been a regular part of our lives. Nora threw herself into her studies, determined now more than ever to succeed, to prove that she could achieve her dreams regardless of what her grandparents had tried to take from her. She joined the debate team and started taking advanced placement classes, spent her weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter, and her evenings tutoring younger students in math and science. She was becoming an extraordinary young woman, kind and driven and thoughtful, and I saw so much of Michael in her that it sometimes made my heart ache with a mixture of grief and pride. My parents tried to reach out periodically in those early months, birthday cards for Nora that I returned unopened, Christmas gifts that I donated to charity without letting my daughter see them, voicemails that I deleted without listening to more than the first few words. They wanted reconciliation, wanted to pretend that nothing had happened, wanted to go back to the way things had been before I discovered what they had done. But they never apologized, never acknowledged that what they had done was wrong, never took responsibility for the hurt they had caused or the trust they had broken. Their overtures were full of excuses and justifications, explanations about family and helping Morgan and how Nora didn't really need the money, how they had made a decision for the good of the family, and I had blown everything out of proportion. I wasn't interested in their justifications. I wasn't interested in anything they had to say. until they were ready to admit what they had done and truly apologize for it. Nora asked me about them sometimes in those first months, her voice carefully casual as if she didn't really care about the answer but needed to ask anyway. She wanted to know if I had heard from her grandparents, if they had tried to contact us, if I thought they were doing okay in their new condo. I always answered honestly, telling her when they had reached out and what I had done in response, letting her make her own decisions about whether she wanted to hear from them. She never did. She would listen to my responses and then change the subject, returning to her homework or her friends or whatever television show she was currently binge-watching. But I could see the hurt in her eyes every time, the reminder that the grandparents she had loved had chosen her cousin over her, had stolen from her, and never even said they were sorry. Time moved forward the way it always does, indifferent to human drama and heartbreak, carrying us into a future that looked different than I had once imagined, but was nonetheless full of possibility. Nora grew from a wounded 14-year-old into a confident teenager who knew what she wanted and was willing to work for it. A young woman who understood that family wasn't just about blood relations, but about the people who showed up for you, who protected you, who loved you enough to put your needs above their own desires. She had watched me fight for her, had seen what it looked like to stand up for what was right even when the people standing against you were people you had loved and trusted your entire life. And she had learned something from that experience about the kind of person she wanted to become. 3 years after that Sunday dinner that changed everything, Nora was 17 years old and in her senior year of high school, applying to colleges across the country with a confidence and determination that made me prouder than I could ever express. Her college fund now sat at $94,000, grown through careful investment and continued contributions from my salary and the interest that had accrued on the returned funds. It wasn't enough for a full ride at an elite private university, but it was enough to give her options, enough to ensure she wouldn't graduate with crushing debt, enough to make Michael's dream for his daughter a reality. She had applied to 11 schools, ranging from the state university 20 minutes from our house to small liberal arts colleges on the East Coast, and she was waiting to hear back with a mixture of excitement and impatience that was entirely normal for a teenager in her position. I came home from work one afternoon to find a letter in our mailbox, the return address showing my parents' new condo, my mother's familiar handwriting spelling out my name on the envelope. I recognized the stationery, the same cream-colored paper with the floral border she had always used for thank-you notes and birthday cards, and the monthly reminders about family dinners that I would never receive again. I stood in our kitchen for a long moment, holding the envelope and wondering whether to even open it, whether there was anything my mother could say at this point that would matter to me after 3 years of silence and broken trust. Curiosity won over indifference in the end, and I slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the letter, my mother's words spreading across the page in neat cursive that had been drilled into her in Catholic school decades ago. The letter was long, several pages of my mother's handwriting detailing all the ways she felt wronged by my actions, all the family events she had missed because I had cut off contact, all the memories she was being denied as a grandmother because of my stubbornness and vindictiveness. She wrote about family and forgiveness, about how holding on to anger was only hurting me and Nora, about how she and my father had made a decision that they believed was right at the time, and how I had punished them excessively for a simple mistake. She wrote about how much she missed Nora, how she had watched her grow up through Facebook photos that friends and relatives had posted, how she had cried at every birthday and holiday that passed without seeing her granddaughter. She wrote about wanting to reconcile, wanting to move forward, wanting to put the past behind them and rebuild the relationship that I had destroyed with my legal actions and my refusal to forgive. Nowhere in those several pages did my mother apologize. Nowhere did she acknowledge that what she had done was wrong, that stealing from her granddaughter's college fund had been a betrayal of trust and a violation of her responsibilities as co-trustee. Nowhere did she take responsibility for the hurt she had caused or the consequences that had resulted from her own actions. Instead, she blamed me for everything. For the lawsuit, for the financial ruin they had experienced, for the lost years of grandmother-granddaughter memories, for the fractured family relationships that had resulted from my inability to let go of a grudge. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation, an attempt to make me feel guilty for seeking justice, to position herself as the victim and me as the aggressor, to rewrite the narrative of what had happened in a way that cast her in the most sympathetic light possible. I read the letter once, then read it again, feeling a strange mixture of anger and sadness, and something that might have been pity for a woman who could not bring herself to admit when she was wrong. I thought about responding, about writing back and explaining one more time why what she had done was so hurtful, why an apology was the bare minimum required for any possibility of reconciliation, why I would never allow her back into Nora's life until she took responsibility for her actions. But I had explained all of this before, in phone calls and emails and conversations with relatives who tried to mediate, and none of it had made any difference. My mother was incapable of seeing herself as the villain in this story, incapable of understanding that her actions had consequences that couldn't be erased with a letter full of guilt trips and self-justification. So instead of responding, I folded the letter back into its envelope and walked to the kitchen trash can, letting it drop inside with a soft sound that felt like an ending. Nora came downstairs as I was standing over the trash can, her phone in her hand, and a confused expression on her face. She asked if I was okay, asked what I was doing standing there looking at the garbage like it had personally offended me, and I realized that she had seen the envelope, had probably recognized the handwriting as quickly as I had. I turned to face my daughter, this young woman who was so much stronger and wiser than I had been at her age, and I told her that her grandmother had written me a letter. Nora's face changed in an instant, the confusion replaced by something guarded and careful, and she asked me what it said. I told her the truth, that it said her grandmother wanted to see her, wanted to reconcile, wanted to be part of our lives again. Nora was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then she asked the question that I had known was coming, the question that her grandmother's letter had not even attempted to answer. Did she say she was sorry? Nora asked, and her voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath the steady surface. Did she apologize for taking my college money, for stealing from Dad's legacy, for lying about it until you caught them? I shook my head, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and told Nora that no, the letter had not included an apology. There had been justifications and excuses and guilt trips, but no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no acceptance of responsibility, no apology for the hurt they had caused. Nora nodded slowly, processing this information with the same quiet strength she had shown throughout this entire 3-year ordeal, and when she spoke again, her voice was firm and certain. She said that if her grandmother couldn't even say she was sorry, then Nora didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear from her, didn't want to pretend that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. I told her that was her choice to make, that I would never force her to have a relationship with anyone she didn't want in her life, that I was proud of her for knowing her own boundaries and standing up for herself. She nodded again, turned back toward the stairs, and called over her shoulder that she had homework to finish, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the letter in the trash and the knowledge that I had done the right thing, even when doing the right thing had cost me everything. The spring of Nora's senior year brought acceptance letters from 7 of the 11 schools she had applied to, including her top choice, a small liberal arts college in Vermont with an excellent environmental science program and a campus that had made her eyes light up when we visited the previous fall. The financial aid package they offered was generous, combined with scholarships she had earned for her academic achievements and community service, and her college fund would cover the rest with enough left over for graduate school if she decided to pursue an advanced degree. She stood in our kitchen on a rainy April afternoon, the acceptance letter in her hands and tears streaming down her face, and I pulled her into a hug and whispered how proud I was, how proud Michael would have been, how much she deserved every good thing that was coming to her. We celebrated that night with pizza and ice cream, just the two of us, and somewhere between the slices and the scoops, Nora mentioned that she was glad she didn't have to worry about how to pay for this, glad that her dad's legacy was still intact, glad that I had fought for her even when fighting had cost me my relationship with my parents. That conversation stayed with me long after Nora went to bed that night. Her acceptance letter pinned to the bulletin board above her desk, where she would see it every morning when she woke up. I thought about everything that had led us to this moment, the years of careful saving and planning that Michael had done before his death, the years of scraping and sacrificing I had done after, the discovery of the theft and the lawsuit, and the long, painful process of holding my parents accountable for what they had done. I thought about the letter in the trash can, my mother's inability to apologize, my sister's defense of the indefensible, my father's stubborn silence throughout the entire legal process. I thought about family and what that word really meant, about trust, and how easily it could be broken, about justice, and whether it was ever truly satisfying or if it was just the best we could hope for in a world that was often unfair. And I thought about Michael, about what he would have thought of all this, about whether he would have done the same things I did or if he would have found another way, about how much I still missed him even after all these years, and how grateful I was that his daughter was going to have the future he had dreamed for her. The story ends here, with Nora preparing to start college in the fall and me preparing for an empty nest, with my parents living in their downsized condo and pretending they were the victims, with Kelly and Morgan going on with their lives as if nothing had happened. It ends with justice served, but relationships broken beyond repair, with a daughter who learned that family could hurt you, but also that some people would fight for you no matter what, with a mother who would do it all again, if she had to, because protecting her child was more important than protecting the feelings of people who had proven they didn't deserve her trust. It ends with a question, the same question I asked at the beginning. Did I go too far, or did I do exactly what needed to be done? I know what my answer is, but I'm curious about yours. When family betrays you, when people you've loved and trusted your entire life steal from your child and refuse to apologize, when the only path to justice involves destroying relationships that can never be repaired, what would you have done differently? Would you have let it go for the sake of peace? Would you have forgiven without an apology? Would you have protected your daughter's future at the cost of your family relationships? I made my choice, and I live with the consequences every day. But I sleep well at night knowing that I did what was right, that I honored my husband's memory, that I protected my daughter's future, and that I showed Nora what it looked like to stand up for yourself even when the whole world was telling you to sit down and be quiet. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between family and justice, if you've ever wondered whether you were doing the right thing when everyone around you said you were wrong, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me your story. Tell me what you would have done in my situation. Tell me whether you think the price I paid for justice was too high or exactly right. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. I read every comment, and your stories give me strength. Remind me that I'm not alone in believing that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst, but that doesn't mean you have to let them get away with it. You have the right to stand up for yourself, to demand justice, to protect the people who depend on you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'll see you in the next video.